She lost everything: her husband, her best friend, and her own identity. After discovering that her husband was cheating with the very woman she trusted most, Margaret's life collapsed into darkness. But fate played a crueler trick. A sudden earthquake took her life, only to awaken her in another world inside the body of a tragic novel's heroine, Rosie Vance. Now trapped in a story she once read, Margaret must fight to rewrite her destiny, facing her treacherous ex-friend reborn as her rival once again. In a realm of aristocrats' deceit and forbidden passion, she swears never to be the victim again. This is a tale of revenge, rebirth, and redemption, where every betrayal becomes a weapon, and every move decides who will fall and who will rise. Margaret was surprised to hear the incredible news that her best friend Jaduga was pregnant and would soon be getting married. Margaret was surprised at how fast the events were unfolding. Until recently, Jaduga had no intention of getting married. Her friend explained that she wanted to wear a wedding dress before her belly grew, and her fiancé was so happy about the pregnancy that he immediately proposed marriage. Margaret was happy for her friend but did not expect the trick that would lead her to dive into the world of a love story and would make her see herself and her surroundings in a new way. Today, Jaduga handed Margaret the envelope with the wedding invitation. The friend smiled sweetly and confidently and asked Margaret to attend the most important celebration of her life. Margaret agreed because she and Jaduga had been friends for 10 years. The young woman opened the invitation and discovered a complete coincidence between the names of Jaduga's fiancé and her husband. Both were named Alex and had the same last name, Green. Jaduga laughed out loud, which surprised Margaret a lot. A friend claimed that the name coincidence was not a coincidence but an obvious fact. Jaduga asked Margaret to unfold the invitation and look more closely at the attached photo. Margaret's surprise only grew when she realized that the man depicted looked very familiar to her. Her husband was shown as a happy newlywed, hugging her best friend. The bad news from her best friend was breaking Margaret. Jaduga said that he and Alex planned to get married on their 6th anniversary. Margaret's hands nervously gripped the invitation. The words got stuck in her throat. Jaduga said that Margaret should not doubt that Alex was the father of the child and should congratulate them. Margot found the strength to stand up abruptly, so much so that the chair fell to the floor with an incredible crash. The cafe customers were surprised to hear the young woman shout that she would never accept a divorce. Tears of anger and disappointment flowed from Margot's eyes. She was ready to fight for her love. Jaduga caustically commented that it was time for Margaret to wake up. She and Alex were not married, but Jaduga was married to him, so Margaret was the mistress. More than the fact of the betrayal, what destroyed Margaret was the fact that Alex initially did not see her as his wife. He was saving that place for someone else. Jaduga was ruthless and declared that Margaret had to get out of her and Alex's life. Margaret's ex-best friend called her a grey mouse and ordered her to go out and sit quietly in her hole. Margaret no longer remembered if the meeting with Jaduga at the cafe had taken place a long time ago or if it had just happened. She had lost track of time. The first thing Margaret did was quit the job where she worked alongside her ex-husband. Then the young woman distanced herself from her friends and stopped communicating with her family. Margaret felt that everyone despised her and laughed at how cleverly her lover and best friend had deceived her. The ground disappeared beneath the young woman's feet. Her life had no meaning or support. Her existence seemed pointless and in vain. One day Margot realized that she had been existing in that state for 3 years. The girl hid from everyone and simply waited for time to heal her wounds so she could move on. This couldn't continue any longer, otherwise Margaret would be no different from the heroine of the book she had just read. It was a tragic novel about Lady Margot who suffered the endless betrayals of Count Eric. Her husband, Lady Margot, silently endured her husband's misdeeds without showing any sign of displeasure. Margaret had been reading a lot over the past 3 years, which helped her distract herself from her own problems, but the helpless and weak-willed Rosie was so similar to her that her story began to greatly irritate the girl. However, thanks to this novel, Margaret began to do at least something to avoid repeating the fate of the novel's heroine. Margaret requested a name change and began looking for a permanent job. The only difference between this day and all the previous ones was that there was a tsunami, an earthquake alert on TV. Margaret didn't care about the Earth's furious forces, but the elements themselves seized the girl, and the whole building shook. The beams collapsed and Margaret fell lower and lower. The girl called for help in vain. No one heard her screams. Margaret remembered that for 3 long years she had wished for the world to collapse right now, but frankly speaking, she had dreamed of a completely different ending. The large and wealthy house, practically a palace, was lit by the afternoon sun's rays. The young aristocrat was disappointed but somehow calmly accepted the news that his wife had suffered a miscarriage, which Dr. Bromental communicated to him. The doctor expressed his concern and said this happened to the lady due to a great moral shock. Asclepius assured the owner that his wife had no serious health problems. Disappointed by the news, the husband left the room. The door slammed shut behind him. The doctor looked at him puzzled, and inside him grew the desire to leave that family. The red-haired woman with cherry-colored eyes looked at the man in the white coat with confusion. Bromental identified the woman as Madame Vincent and asked if she was okay. The woman's mind panicked. She thought she had no idea who this Vance was and couldn't understand why they were addressing her that way. Bromental looked at his hostess with concern and told her that the lady still wasn't well and shouldn't overexert herself. Suddenly the woman realized she was Rosie Vance, the only daughter of Count Vance. Rosie was beautiful, but it turned out she was incredibly stupid. She fell in love with Eric, the sworn enemy of her family, and left her home for him. Indignation flooded the woman's mind. It couldn't be Rosie Vance, it wasn't her. The Dr. Bromental was prepared for the woman's inappropriate reactions. But her denial of her own identity also surprised him. The woman sat up in bed and burst out with curses. Incredible, completely unfit for a refined countess, the lady cried and asked fate what she had done wrong and why. Instead of a beautiful fairy tale, they had thrown her into this stupid novel. It would have been better for her to die. Absurdly, in an abandoned basement of a house that had collapsed due to an earthquake, let Margaret Pan disappear from that world forever instead of being reborn in this world as the unfortunate Rosie Vance. The luxurious Vance Palace was bathed in moonlight. The woman saw a young and attractive man by her side. He called her Rosie. Rosie found herself deeply asleep for a while. She assumed her body was smarter than her and had simply turned off all modes. Rosie apologized and justified herself, saying that the doctor had told her to rest. The man was outraged and reminded her that she had fainted and lost her baby and accused her of not having slept enough during the last 3 days, all because of her fault. The woman realized that since he said she had lost the child, that meant she had ended up in the romance in the same place where Rosie had witnessed the betrayal. What a scoundrel this Eric is, she thought. He didn't even say a trivial sorry to the insulted and deceived woman. At that moment, some strong male hands grabbed her and pressed her hard against the bed. The man demanded that she stay still and do everything quickly. Eric's actions left no doubt about his intentions, while the offended husband complained that Rosie managed to get pregnant only 3 years after the marriage and thought he could rest. But she couldn't stand it either. Unexpectedly for Eric, Rosie was outraged by his behavior and said she didn't want intimacy with him today, that she needed to abstain until her body returned to normal. Eric did not expect such a categorical refusal from the woman who had fallen into his dependence. The man got very angry and lost control of his emotions. Eric grabbed Rosie by the neck and said she was clearly confused. The man continued squeezing his hand around Rosie's throat and said she was not in a position to force him to run. After her, she herself had offered to give him a child. With a sudden movement, Eric threw Rosie away from him. She hit the bed hard, but it was easier for her to breathe. Rosie coughed and tried to regain consciousness. Eric arrogantly declared that she shouldn't dare interfere in his affairs. Eric forgot today's incident and expressed hope that, despite her impenetrable stupidity, she could handle everything herself. Drowned and humiliated, Rosie only heard a contemptuous goodbye from Eric and saw the door close. Margaret, now in Rosie's body, cursed the author who wrote this book and made Eric a bastard. She didn't know whom to curse for ending up here, but she really wanted to get out of there. The woman greeted the morning, wondering how she could find at least someone who could help her. Rosie lived isolated. She didn't communicate with anyone and wasn't close to anyone. Suddenly, the woman heard a strange conversation. The maids accused one of them of not wanting to work and that they had to do her tasks for several days. Rosie asked the servants what was going on and why they were making so much noise. One of the maids explained that Donna had disappeared a few days ago, apparently because she had had a disagreement with the other children. Another person angrily claimed that if she had had a phone, she would have filmed everything they were doing and reported it to emergency services or sued them. Rosie, upon learning about the phone and the rescue service, ordered that they bring her the girl who had spoken about all this. After a while, a girl in a maid's dress with beautiful blonde hair appeared before Rosie. Rosie told the girl that she had heard her being called Donna and realized that she was having a lot of trouble at work. The cautious look of the maid spoke of distrust. The woman suggested that the maid discuss everything in private without unnecessary witnesses. After a brief exchange of news, the maid exclaimed nervously that she realized the reality of what was happening and that actually both were involved in the same matter. Rosie said that, to be honest, she herself didn't understand really how this happened. After being electrocuted, the maid said that in that world she had an accident, lost consciousness, and woke up here. Rosie suggested that they died the same day, and that's why they ended up in the same place. The maid responded that she didn't fully understand what was going on here, but she offered friendship to Rosie. Rosie was happy. She just thought it would be difficult for her to survive alone in an unknown world when she met this girl. Probably fate had brought them together. The woman suggested that with Donna in the novel, she wouldn't feel so alone. The maid said that in the past world her name was Jadwiga. Her parents gave her this name so that she would live long and happily and not lose to anyone. This name is rare, the maid boasted. Once you hear it, you never forget it. Rosie chuckled. Margaret, that is herself definitely would never forget Jadwiga. The irony of fate was that the reincarnation of her ex-best friend was now in front of Rosie. A long friendship didn't prevent the woman from taking Margaret's husband and successfully marrying him. Rosie tried to remain absolutely calm and friendly. The girl said that Jadwiga was a very beautiful name and thought that although the name wasn't very common, it wasn't certain that she was the same. Jadwiga. Rosie asked Jadwiga Donna how old Donna was. She burst into tears and said she was 29 years old in that world and that she was very upset for having married so young. Rosie realized that she was the same Jadwiga. There could be no doubt this was the same woman she didn't want to see even after death. But why was she here? Donna asked if they were the same age and what her name was. Rosie lied, saying that in the past world, her name was Hannah Donna. Donna replied that it was the first time she had heard that name and that she didn't know any girl by that name. Rosie found it natural since she had changed her name from Margaret, which she had carried for more than 20 years, to Hannah. Margaret was always a calm person and didn't have many friends. The girl looked at her ex-best friend and thought the gods were merciless since they tied sworn enemies with an evil fate. Rosie tried to project kindness and succeeded. Donna announced that she had a friend who was very much like Rosie, and that made her even happier to meet her Jadwig to Donna. Remembered pleasing Margaret and how she trampled on her life? Donna found it amusing to see Margaret that day unable to speak. Only shedding tears, the girl asked Rosie to tell her what the novel was about. She was not entirely familiar with the plot a long time ago when her husband had not yet been taken away. Margaret naively agreed to help Jadwiga and would have told her everything yes, but not now. She replied that it was about a trivial love. Rosie Margaret did not mention that this novel has a very tragic plot and a sad ending. Donna was sure that she was the main character who was destined to achieve dizzying success. In the end, this caused a malicious smile on Rosie's face. The woman claimed that Donna was an anonymous extra, which caused a storm of indignation and the question of who the main character was. Rosie claimed that the main characters here are Count Vance and she is the Countess Vance, his wife. Donna was incredibly upset and outraged by the fact that the leading role did not belong to her. Rosie said calmly that it was not her fault, it just happened. Donna thought that Countess Vance seemed like a country bumpkin and that her fancy clothes didn't save her, and that she was clearly prettier than her. Donna looked at the picture with an evaluative air and wished she could dress much more elegantly. Donna wondered aloud what kind of person Count Vance would be. Thinking that if the central character was so insignificant, then the protagonist would be close to him. Rosie said that Eric was the epitome of charm, so cute, that it was impossible not to fall in love with him at first sight. Rosie admitted that she fell in love with Eric immediately and that she was constantly running after him. Donna replied that since they had dragged her there, she hadn't been able to meet any handsome man. Rosie made sure Donna understood her. Once she met Eric and warned her that the Count was a bit cold. Lady Rosie admitted that it was she who insisted on marrying Eric. Donna pitied her flatteringly and pretended that Rosie seemed very beautiful to her, and she didn't understand why Eric ignored her. Margaret Rosie no longer believed Jadwiga. She understood that she was pretending to comfort her at that moment. The door suddenly opened, and the Count Eric shouted angrily that someone there was just having fun, and that he had worked all night and hadn't slept a wink. Donna asked fearfully who the man was. Eric did not behave gallantly at all. And who was there to make a scene? Only his wife and a maid. Rosie introduced her new old acquaintance, Count Eric de Vance. Her husband Donna. Jadwiga sighed languidly and looked flirtatiously at the Count. The girl's finger, as if by accident, began to draw circles around her lips. Margaret Rosie immediately recognized the old habit of Jadwiga of flirting with other people's suitors. She knew for sure that getting involved with her husband was dangerous for any woman, but she decided not to stop Jadwiga. Jadwiga Doña made an elegant bow and lowered her gaze languidly. The woman announced that she was pleased to meet the Count and that her name was Doña, not at all ashamed of the fact that she was a servant and her new acquaintance a countess. Donna declared that she was a close friend of Rosie. The Count looked at the woman with ambiguous interest and said he didn't know his wife had any friends. Donna replied with the same subtext, that she and the Countess had had a conversation in their childhood. Rosie Margaret was upset to see the communication between these two people, and finally decided to help Donna win over her husband. She herself asked for it. Donna continued seducing the Count, and began to tell him she had heard a lot about him and had always been told he was a wonderful man, and now she saw that was absolutely true. Eric became interested in the new woman who had appeared in his circle, especially one who was so accessible. Doña thought the Count had all possible virtues. Eric has a strong body, a handsome face, a huge mansion, and a lot of money. This man was simply made for Doña, at least that's what she thought. Doña was sure that the role of Countess would suit her better than Rosie. This world would also revolve around her just like the previous one. Rosie Margaret pretended to feel unwell and went to her rooms, leaving Eric and Donna alone with their fate. Margaret was convinced it was the same Jadwiga. But why did this shameless woman get involved in the book with her? Jadwiga Donna and her husband Eric are like two peas in a pod. May they live happily ever after. Rosie Margaret hoped to be lucky and able to escape from her husband and live a quiet and happy life. The woman suddenly realized that Jadwiga's appearance in the novel was not a punishment from the gods, but a gift. Margaret had the chance to get rid of two wastes at once and close the gestalt. Rosie Margaret closed her eyes dreamily. She would not allow herself to be treated as before, however. It was necessary to decide what and how to live after the divorce. Rosie is the daughter of noble but poor parents, and since she stubbornly insisted on marrying Count Eric, her parents cut all ties with her. That is why Rosie's family is hardly mentioned in the novel, and Margaret knew nothing about them. This was a real problem. Even if Margaret discovers something about Rosie's family and finds her home, it is possible that the prodigal daughter might not even be allowed to enter the door. The woman did not want a divorce, and to end up on the street she had to leave her husband in order to live happily ever after. Margaret Rosie decided she had to survive in this world, and for that she needed first of all information about him. As much and as detailed as possible. Rosie saw the maids in the hallway and approached them with a request. The woman ordered that Gwen's butler be called Gwen, did not keep us waiting long, and quickly appeared before her lover. Rosie told her that Gwen urgently needed a tutor. She clarified the reason why the lady decided to hire a teacher. The woman replied that she was a countess and that she was going to enter high society. She needed to reach a level of education to be able to represent her husband with dignity there. Gwen was surprised by the lady's decision unexpectedly. She decided to go from being a suffering woman to an aristocrat. Gwen had clearly seen how much Rosie had suffered lately because of her husband, but now apparently she had decided to move forward. The butler replied that he would convey her wish to the Count, who would not be able to refuse her. And Margaret Rosie decided she had one less problem. The only thing worrying the woman was the suspicious behavior of the maids. The maids whispered and looked away. The reason became clear very quickly. At first, Margaret Rosie expected something like that. The woman sent the servants to do the weaving tasks. The maids tried to delay or distract her. Margaret silently approached the room. She had just left and listened. Jadwiga Donna pretended to refuse, and Eric insisted that the servants remain silent, and that his wife would always sit in her room, so she had nothing to fear. The last doubts about the correctness of her actions disappeared from Margaret's mind. These two deserved each other. Now let them live as they want, and Margaret will be alone. The sun cheerfully looked through the windows of the mansion of the Count Vans. He didn't care about people's problems. Count Vans also didn't care about his wife. He was only surprised by the butler's message that she had decided to call a tutor. It was strange that she decided to do this right now when he had advised her to do something. She didn't lift a finger. The Count decided to let his wife do whatever she wanted. The butler asked which teacher they should choose. Eric said that Rosie should deal with her teachers by herself. There was no need to ask him about that. The butler saw that there was someone else in the Count's bed, and it was Donna. The woman crawled out from under the blanket and grumbled that since the Count had woken up, he could have woken her up too. Eric replied that she had been very tired yesterday and that he wanted to let her sleep a bit. The Count asked the butler abruptly if he had anything else to say. If not, he could leave and should do so as quickly as possible. Eric was eager to be alone with Donna. Gwen hurried to leave so as not to provoke the owner's anger. Donna looked at the butler disdainfully while kissing Count Eric. The woman thought with arrogance that it was hard to be as beautiful as she was. The Count gently stroked the woman's chin. The next second, he roughly pulled his lover onto the luxurious bed. After a while, the Count asked if Donna still wasn't satisfied. It seemed she was satisfied and sleeping like a baby. The woman pretended that Eric was handsome and smiled at him tenderly. Donna Jadwiga did not consider Duke Eric an excellent lover. He was not as good in bed as she thought. However, the woman said she loved being with him. Rosie Margaret scribbled her pen on the paper, taking notes as her tutor dictated. The woman was desperate. Why did she have to learn so much? What would happen next? If the first lesson seemed very difficult to her, the teacher summarized the story. Rosie's family owned the county of Serbiard and lost the fight for the imperial throne. Their lives were saved only with the help of Arthur, the crown prince and archduke of the empire. The patron couldn't save them from losing their possessions and total ruin. After hearing the whole story, Margaret learned that Rosie had fallen in love and had married the man who had destroyed her family. And the monster who seemed so in her parents' eyes, it turned out that the current ruler is not the biological father of the crown prince. The tutor said that the previous emperor and empress fell ill and died, and the young heir's uncle took the throne in their place. It was for the best, because at that time the crown prince could have become a big problem for the country. The heir was cold-blooded and ruthless, and had a cruel character. The tutor warned Rosie not to get involved with this man under any circumstances. The lady diligently took notes, all the information that reached Archduke Arthur. Margaret remembered that according to the novel's plot, Arthur was executed by the emperor's supporters. Finding him was very important and not easy either. Caution in any case would not be superfluous. The maid reported that the carriage the lady had ordered earlier for 9 p.m. had arrived. Margaret learned that Rosie wanted to attend the auction and buy a gift for the Count. Margaret decided that Rosie was simply crazy. What did she see in this brat to give him gifts? However, once the carriage was ordered and ready, the woman decided to go to the auction and have some fun. Very soon, Margaret Rosie arrived at the place and got out of the carriage. The woman found herself at the same auction house where, according to the novel's plot, Rosie won the Tears of the Moon. This poetic name was given to a necklace that Eric had long dreamed of, and Rosie had strived to get it at an auction and give it to her husband. The Count received the tears and sent them as a gift to the Empress. Later, it turned out that the necklace was a cheap fake, and the Count unleashed all his anger on his wife. Margaret knew that the Tears of the Moon were empty, and that buying those jewels made no sense, but leaving like that would be strange for those around her. At the entrance, they gave the woman a number and told her to have a good time. Margaret found the issuing of numbers strange and assumed it was a seat number. When the woman found the seat whose number was indicated on the ticket, it turned out to be already occupied. Margaret Rosie shyly looked at the man occupying her seat. In front of her sat a handsome blonde man, who, judging by his clothing, belonged to the highest circles of the aristocracy. The woman addressed the man politely and informed him that he was occupying her seat. The man radiated coldness and disdain for everything around him. She wondered why there were numbered places there. This had never happened before. Margaret Rosie began to break out in a cold sweat. Apparently she had made a big mistake. The servant accompanying her came to her rescue. He told the woman that it was not a seat number, but a number to participate in the auction. It is used to announce and name the prize, but one can sit in any seat. Margaret felt guilty for wanting to drive away a man who was simply sitting silently. The woman heard the employee call the man Archduke Arthur and apologized for the incident, and she was simply stunned by her own insolence. Margaret's assistant Rosie hurried to apologize to the powerful aristocrat for her lover's mischief, but the crown prince had already stood up. The tutor's instructions passed through the woman's mind not to get involved with Arthur under any circumstances. It was urgent to get out of that situation. Margaret hurried to admit her mistake. Archduke Arthur could not say a word during the Countess's quick apology speech. The woman murmured that she asked for forgiveness for her ignorance and the rudeness she had committed, and that she begged for mercy. Margaret Rosie closely observed the expression on the Archduke's face. Arthur, the woman, decided that he did not seem very angry yet and that she had the chance to leave quickly. Arthur took Margaret's hand, Rosie, and led the woman to her seat. The Archduke ordered the woman to sit in the chair next to his. Margaret Rosie still hesitated to accept the Archduke's invitation. The woman said she wanted to sit across from him, a suggestion to which the Crown Prince resisted because then it would completely block his view. Margaret Rosie decided it was better to agree with this man than to contradict him. The auction began with the host declaring aloud that here only money mattered. It was announced that lots of incredible value would be auctioned. The first listed lot was an ancient gemstone. The participants of the auction who wished to acquire the first lot began to bid. Margaret listened and was surprised at how much money these people were willing to pay for a single stone. Those gathered there lived on a completely different level than ordinary people. Meanwhile, the gemstone was bought for 35 million local tugriks. The next lot announced was an item many of those present wanted to become owners of. The host announced that the next lot was a moon-tier necklace. The initial bid was surprising in its size and rose to 50 million rubles. The auction began and the initial offer was set at 10 million. Margaret remembered the plot. Rosie would win, but the necklace would turn out to be fake and would only bring disappointment to both. This time let others win, the woman decided. She didn't even flinch. Margaret Rosie saw that her neighbor Archduke Arthur had decided to enter the fight. For possession of the moon tiers, the man raised his number and declared aloud that he would give 100 million for the necklace. 100 million for the necklace. The woman listened with surprise as the Crown Prince's opponents kept raising the price of the necklace. Margaret Rosie thought she shouldn't remain silent throughout the auction, but if she got into trouble at the wrong moment, she would bring trouble on herself and everything would happen again. The Archduke decided to raise the bid even higher. Apparently he was very eager to win. Margaret Rosie placed her hand on Arthur's wrist and fervently begged him not to buy the tiers. The woman asked the prince heir to stop buying the necklace, explaining that it would be a waste of money. The Archduke was very surprised by his neighbor's insistence and asked her what business she had with his money. Margaret looked at Arthur with pleading eyes and wondered how to answer him without hurting herself. Countess Vance continued holding Archduke Arthur's hand, preventing him from making his next bid. The woman cursed herself for her bad habit of meddling in other people's affairs. She needed to eradicate it as soon as possible. Finally, Margaret decided to tell the truth and declared that the necklace was fake. Arthur asked the woman how she knew that, because if she was right, then the auction organizers were insulting all the aristocrats present. Margaret didn't know how to explain it. She couldn't say she had read it in a book. The woman said that the auctioneers themselves didn't know what they were putting up for sale. A counterfeit. Arthur stated that the woman seemed too confident, but if the necklace turned out to be genuine, her intervention would cost her dearly. Either Countess Vance was no longer afraid of anything, Arthur clarified, and Margaret Rosie feared she had recognized her. At that moment it was announced that the Tears of the Moon had sold for 360 million. Archduke Arthur asked the Countess why she was silent, or if she planned to flee without taking any responsibility. Margaret decided that if she said nothing, she could be killed. The woman said she was betting her body that the Tears of the Moon she had just bought were fake. Countess was so sure of her words that the Archduke was surprised again. The man asked again, "Are you really putting your body at risk?" Margaret mentally called herself an idiot, but she actually meant to say neck, but she mispronounced the word. The woman tried to justify herself and retract her words. Arthur smiled and said that although he wasn't interested in married women, he would test her sincerity. Margaret Rosie went cold at the Archduke's words. She was very afraid of that man. The woman tried to say she hadn't meant anything embarrassing, but that she was going to risk her life. However, someone called Archduke Arthur and the man hurried to leave. Arthur reasoned that taking the item knowing it could be a fake was somehow unpleasant. Maybe it was worth ignoring Countess Vance's words and buying the Tears of the Moon. Arthur thought that if he offered the previous buyer a higher price, he could leave the auction today with the desired purchase. However, the man remembered the desperation in the Countess's eyes when she asked him not to buy the necklace. Arthur didn't even realize it immediately who had bothered him. He never expected to run into one day. With the prodigal daughter of Mrs. Serbiart, now Rosie has become an exact copy of her mother and just as beautiful. Arthur sighed. The Crown Prince. The first meeting of Rosie and Arthur took place a long time ago in the ancestral castle of their parents. Rosie was very little then and didn't want to greet the prince, who was also a very small boy. Then the girl claimed that the prince didn't look like him at all and that he wasn't him at all. The girl was capricious. She cried loudly and hid behind her mother's dress. Arthur remembered his confusion at this childish hysteria, and very foolish. The Archduke recalled that even when Rosie cried inconsolably, her face kept a sweet expression. Memories of distant childhood years evoked a pleasant nostalgia in the Archduke. The Countess Vance was desperate. It seemed she had committed an irreparable act. Margaret Rosie imagined that she would be subjected to terrible punishments and executions. Her bodyguard Sarin, who accompanied her, agreed with his lover. The man reassured the lady, telling her he was capable of protecting her from any danger. However, nothing happened and they calmly got into the carriage. Sarin wondered how a forgery could have ended up at an auction of this level. The Countess assumed the organizer did not sell the copy intentionally. Someone must have replaced the original with a copy. Saren doubted the accuracy of the lady's conclusions and wondered how she knew. The woman asked Saren not to shout so loudly about important and secret things. The countess said she had really seen it in a dream, but if she told the truth they would consider her mentally ill, so she decided to settle for a small lie. All the way to the mansion, Saren wondered if everything would be okay with his lover a new morning at Count Van's mansion. Promised joy and happiness to everyone, each one had their own. Margaret Rose was organizing and rereading notes. When Donna Hadwig burst into her room, the woman without hesitation grabbed the Countess's papers and began to ask her what interesting things she had written there. Margaret said she was simply bored sitting, doing nothing, and that's why she was rereading several articles. Jaduga even felt a little sorry for Margaret. No one spoke to her there. The woman pretended to be kind and suggested that Hannah felt very lonely in this world. If only the Count were kinder to his wife. Donna Jadwiga sighed hypocritically. Margaret really wanted to respond to Jadwiga with something caustic. But now she had to lull her enemy's vigilance. The Countess noticed that Donna had new earrings in her ears. Margaret Rosie praised the beauty of the ornament and said it looked very good on Donna. The woman assumed it was a gift from Eric. The maid boasted it was a gift from her new boyfriend. Margaret pretended to be happy for Donna Jadwiga. Donna smiled sweetly. This woman had no conscience at all. Margaret once took her smile for genuine joy, but actually, she was just a reflection of vanity and superiority. This woman was proud of the fact that she shared secretly the bed with her best friend's husband. A thought that made Margaret shudder with disgust. Jaduga was proud of having hurt a man who trusted her infinitely. Margaret Rosie's fists clenched nervously from indignation and resentment. She wanted to hit Jaduga and erase that insolent smile from her face forever, but it was not yet time. Jadwiga called Rosie, and the Countess explained that she was looking at the luxurious earrings. Donna Jadwiga boasted that this gift was as beautiful as she was. Margaret Rosie asked the maid how she met her boyfriend. Donna replied that fate had simply brought them together. The woman considered her boyfriend simply the perfect man, which she immediately told Rosie. Donna Jadwiga had already planned how she would take the Countess's place, and in this life she would not allow herself to fail. In her past life, her parents disowned her for stealing her best friend's husband. Jadwiga should have listened to her mom and dad and refused the wedding, but she didn't listen and married that idiot Alex Gray. The woman believed that being reborn in a book was an opportunity given to her by the gods to live the life she deserved. The Countess looked closely at her rival and wondered how far this woman's insolence could go. And then a knock was heard from below. Donna apologized for boasting about her happiness with her friend whose husband did not get along with her. But making someone a spouse is not easy, so Rosie shouldn't worry. Rosie thanked Donna for her concern and said she had no one else who could sympathize with her. The woman thought about how stupid she had been in the past. If she had considered someone close to her whose thoughts were so easy to read and whose actions were so easy to predict, she wished then she had looked more closely at her friend and had not loved so much a man unworthy of her love. Then she would not have suffered so much, she would not have wasted 3 whole years of her life, and she would not have ended up in this book. It was a little comforting that now it was not Jaduga, but she who acted as the puppeteer. She liked this role better. It was fun to see her husband and his girlfriend planning their punishment. A knock was heard at the door, and a servant announced that an invitation had arrived in the name of the hostess. The lackey handed the Countess a sealed envelope. Margaret opened the message frantically, nervously realizing that Rosie had no connections in high society. Donna snatched the letter without hesitation from the Countess's hands. The woman asked what it was. Rosie replied that it was an invitation to a reception. Nothing complicated, just dress well and make new friends. Jadwiga Donna said it would definitely be fun there, and that Rosie should take her with her because they were friends. Rosie said of course, she could take her, but only aristocrats could enter. Servants were not allowed to attend such events. Rosie explained that Donna would simply be shown the door because she had no aristocratic roots. Maybe Donna wants to accompany her as a servant? That is certainly possible. Donna was furious. She already considered herself a future countess and had no intention of serving her rival in front of the empire's aristocrats. Rosie asked Donna if she was mad at her. She didn't want to say anything bad. That's the law. Rosie looked at Donna mischievously and asked if her friend felt offended. The girl knew for sure the blonde was angry, and this only made the pink-haired girl happy. Donna, hiding her anger and mentally insulting Rosie, and ignored the Countess's concerns and lied, saying she was simply upset about the current situation. Judging by the way the blonde laughed with effort, she felt quite offended by the fact that the invitation was not addressed to her but to Countess Rosie. While Rosie looked at whose invitation it was, Donna cursed her lover's wife behind her back. An invitation from Archduke Arthur, but it's unclear why he sent the letter and why it was specifically addressed to her. In the canonical novel, Arthur never even briefly crosses paths with Rosie. It wasn't enough for Rosie to meet him at the auction. She also decided to invite her to a reception, especially since the letter wasn't addressed to Count Vance, but to her personally. Rosie thought it was because of the moon tear necklace that another noble would give to the Empress this time. After all, this necklace was fake, and the rumors about it would definitely spread in the palace. Arthur had heard from Rosie that the necklace was fake and not worth buying. The young woman thought she wouldn't cross paths with the Archduke again. But anyway, she couldn't get attached to the young man because he would soon die, so worrying about Arthur and his relationship with the imperial family now would be useless. But now Arthur is alive and well. So Rosie decided to go to the reception and at the same time explore the situation in high society. Donna noticed something was wrong with the Countess. She would either turn pale or blush, but overall the blonde didn't care. The main thing was that they could take her to see Archduke. Arturo Rosie read with apparent displeasure that the entrance was only for aristocrats and servants were not allowed entry. Doña started thinking about how to get to the appointment because if they only took her she would just be a burden. An eccentric girl came up with a brilliant idea. It definitely should work. The curtains of the spacious closet were pulled aside by the maid's hands. The Count's lover looked with satisfaction at Rosie's dresses and jewelry, as if she were looking at her own personal closet. There was nothing but old and simple dresses, so Doña decided that when she became Countess, she would ask the Count to fill her closet with more sophisticated things, and she would ask him to accompany her to the reception anyway. In the future she would have to meet with the nobility. The blonde's attention focused on the tiara that shone temptingly on the shelf. The girl decided that although the tiara looked simple, it would suit her for now. The Countess's tiara suits her much better than plain Rosie. The girl continues rummaging through the ladies' closet looking for something else to take advantage of. A pair of small children's shoes. They came out of the closet and the blonde picked them up. Donna thought Rosie was an idiot. The Countess had had a miscarriage, and for some reason she was also keeping baby junk. The child only causes problems thinking about it. The girl threw the shoes back under the closet. In her past life she had a child, and she knows better than anyone that this is the only thing that makes noise and cries constantly, and that it's useless in life. It would have been better if the time spent with the baby had been dedicated to taking care of her skin. And in this world there is a nanny who takes care of everything, so it's not that big of a deal. Good. She went to her closet and was horrified to see the mess Donna had made. The blonde turned to the Countess carelessly and told her she simply had nothing to wear. So she was looking for something she could borrow from the Countess. After all, that's what friends are for. To help each other and share personal things. Rosie frowned with displeasure. She really didn't care. But she needed to provoke Donna, so she would want to take her place. The Countess snatched the crown from the maiden's hands, shouting that she could take anything except that tiara. Gorvinka was very outraged by this action of the Countess. The furry one was she began to justify herself and asked that her things not be touched. The tiara was a wedding gift from the Count. Eric and the girl looked at the jewel with some tenderness. This was the first and last gift the Count personally chose for her. These words only made the blonde happy, while Rosie pretended to look sadly at the decoration, pretending to remember the day of her wedding. Donna was happy. She already had 3 gifts from the Count, which meant that the Countess had no chance. Against her, the blonde drew attention to her earrings. She suggested asking the Count for a gift for Rosie because he would definitely listen to her. Rosie feigned surprise and confusion upon understanding why her husband would listen to the requests of a maid. The blonde cheerfully announced that she was now the Count's personal maid. At that moment she was remembering the previous night. She herself had asked to be Eric's personal maid to be closer to her lover, and now she will have more time to spend with him than his wife. So Donna will have more opportunities to talk to Eric. The Countess herself knows that although the Count does not express his feelings very well, he has no equal when it comes to care. Knowing how coldly the Count treats his wife, Donna skillfully plays with her nerves. Rosie decided to flee, claiming she needed to take something from her office. If the real Countess had been in the traveler's place, she definitely would have been upset. Fortunately, her body is not controlled by the real Countess Rosie, so sometimes she doesn't care about the Count. As soon as the Countess left the room, the maid's evil laughter was heard behind the door, but now she could laugh to her heart's content. Donna can wish for the Countess as much as she wants. But if there is a contender for her place, Rosie will be able to leave this house. In her office, there were papers scattered all over the floor, as if a hurricane had passed through. The documents were in terrible disorder, so the girl bent down and began to pick them up from the floor. She left them on the table. The wind really could have taken them away, the girl thought while reading at the same time what was written. The documents describe a plan for the execution of Archduke Arturo, how to do it in such a way that people would not be alarmed if he dies of illness like the Empress. Suspicions of poisoning could arise. The Archduke must be killed in another more reliable way so as not to raise suspicions. What if we take advantage of the last incident? If Archduke Arturo is properly framed, no one will be against his execution. What was described in the letter scared the fake Countess a lot. She clearly got involved in something she shouldn't have. She took the sheets of paper from her hands, and I moved away from them in the opposite direction. It wasn't enough for them to kill the Empress. Now they were also going to get rid of her son. What should I do now? Maybe I don't need to immediately go tell Archduke everything. But if she does, they will kill her for now. The quick footsteps heading toward the office continued. Count Eric opened the door to his office. His face trembled with fear and displeasure. He wished with all his might that his wife would come in. He heard something from Doña and was very upset because his wife was in his office, so he told everything to his wife. The girl acted as if nothing had happened and turned to look at her husband. It was very convenient that she was in front of an open window. The girl calmly justified herself, saying she had run in to look for a book, and the wind had scattered all the papers. You must act completely naturally, as if you had not seen the contents of the letters. The girl asked Eric what it had to do with the book since she was in such a hurry. Maybe the Count was too worried about those pieces of paper that were scattered on the floor. The Countess suggested picking up the sheets together with her husband, arguing that they hadn't done anything together lately. The Count ripped the sheets of paper from his wife's hands with a sharp pull, yelling at her not to even dare touch them. She pressed her bruised hand against her chest, worried. Stepping back at the risk that her husband would sit on the floor, Eric accused his wife of having already read everything. embarrassing, of having treacherously entered his office without permission, and of demanding that he explain the real reason for her visit. Rosie insisted that she simply had come to look for a book for her personal study and that the wind had taken the papers. So she had first closed the window. The Count recalled his last conversation with the butler, who told him that the lady, out of boredom, had decided to dedicate herself to her education. The Count believed that he himself had allowed Rosie to educate herself, so it was not surprising that some book in general was necessary. Eric believed his wife. This time he was really careless. This time he forgave the pink-haired girl, but from now on he forbade her from coming near the office. The man turned toward the door and left the office, completely ignoring his wife. The girl was worried that if she wasn't in the office, she wouldn't have another place to study, but her worries were ignored. The Count closed the door behind him, leaving Rosie to rest since her arm was slightly injured. Rosie finally exhaled, managing to get out of this situation unscathed. And now she needs to deal with Archduke Arthur. That very night, Eric and Rosie had dinner together, sitting at a half-empty table. The Count looked indifferently at the abrasion he had left on the back of his wife's hand. Count Eric suggested that the pink-haired girl go somewhere together in a week. Rosie didn't understand why he had to go with her, that she should go with her lover. The girl thought he was apologizing for hitting her during the day, so she decided to refuse. She told her husband that she had other plans for the next week and that she couldn't get away from them. The Count put down his fork and reminded her that the next week would be a difficult day and Rosie should remember it. The password and misunderstanding kept her away from the meal. She really didn't remember what day it was next week. The Count was very surprised. Next week was his birthday, and Rosie always complained before that day because now she was pretending she didn't know anything. He even invited her to go somewhere. The Countess admitted that she had received an invitation from Archduke Arthur to a reception that would take place that same day. The Count stood up angrily from his chair and hit the table so hard that the dishes shook. Eric was very upset and angry because Archduke Arthur sent an invitation only to Countess Rosie, and he wasn't even informed about the reception. How did it happen that the Archduke ignored the Count and sent a letter to his wife Rosie? She didn't understand that she had just confirmed her husband's words. Well, she was invited and invited. What's the point of murmuring? According to Eric, Rosie and the Archduke had never met, since he could have invited to a reception someone he had never seen before. Rosie started to get annoyed by Eric's questions, but she continued answering honestly. There's nothing strange about the invitation. They met at an auction where the Countess went to buy a gift for the Count. Eric found Rosie's words suspicious, and she had just made it clear that she didn't remember his birthday. And now she was talking about a gift for him. The toxic man concluded that the pink-haired girl was pretending not to care so that he would pay attention to her. The Count decided to pretend that he didn't notice this turn of events. Why would the Archduke invite only Rosie, and what was he planning? Those were the only two thoughts running through the Count's head. However, this isn't especially important now. Eric informed his wife that he accepted to postpone the trip and instead would attend Archduke Arthur's reception this year. Eric intended this reception with the Archduke to be the last in Arthur's life. Donna walked quickly through the halls of the estate, mentally outraged by the audacity of some of the gentlemen. The gentleman, who thought too highly of himself after spending a couple of nights with Donna, decided that the blonde liked him more than the Count did. A naive fool. The blonde doesn't need him in the first place. He is just a humble gentleman. The girl arrived late to Count Eric's summons and on the way pushed and bumped into several maids. The girl immediately put a sweet smile on her face. When she entered Count Vance's room, Eric was not happy with the blonde's tardiness. He had told her more than once that he couldn't stand people not being on time. The girl began making excuses, saying that unexpectedly she had been sent a task she couldn't complete on time. The Count was surprised by this and informed the head maid that Donna was his personal servant and that no one else dared to give her orders. Of course, found someone to blame. She is just a servant, so she was fulfilling the Countess's task. She cannot disobey her. The Count grabbed that blonde by the hand and pulled her toward him. Eric decided that enough was enough. Talking about his wife Rosie, the man insistently placed the blonde on his lap. Today, the blonde would only do what Count Eric said. Donna smiled happily, thinking that the Countess's place would soon be vacant. Meanwhile, it was noon and the estate was bathed in bright sunlight. Bright 4 days left until the banquet. Rosie has already managed to study the names and connections of all the aristocrats, but she doesn't recognize anyone by face. It's a shame there are no photographs in this world at Rosie's first social event where she knows no one. 2 people have to cut their hair: the Duchess, beautiful, who holds all high society in her hands, and Eric's mother, Teresa, the mother-in-law of the story. Doesn't like the pink-haired girl, so she won't be able to join the company of these 2 girls. So Rosie's goal on this floor is single women her age. Since it's her first outing, she shouldn't overdo it. By the way, about those documents from that very day, she only receives lessons in the reception area and doesn't even have the chance to see him again. And when you read the novel, it seems like everything comes easy to the heroine. Suddenly, the Count entered the room. He noticed that his wife was sighing deeply, as if she were about to die. Rosie even got scared by her husband's presence. The man, why is he reaching out to the pink-haired girl? The girl thought he wanted to take her palm. She placed her fragile palm in her husband's outstretched hand. So she got another hit. Eric was disgusted to touch his wife. He absolutely didn't want the girl to touch him. He came to get the gift for the birthday that the Countess had bought him. He pointed to the soft pink box on the table. Rosie was surprised by Eric's demand. Why the hell was he suddenly demanding something from her? The Countess apologized to her husband. She hadn't prepared anything for him. Then Eric pointed to the gift box that was on the table. The pink-haired girl said that this gift was for Archduke Arturo and that she couldn't give it to the Count. Then the Count attacked his wife, which means that on his birthday they didn't even say a kind word to him, and prepared a gift for an Archduke. A countess married with such actions dishonors the honor of the Vans family. The girl couldn't bear such treatment and her husband's rough hands on her wrists. She pushed him and hit him on the palm. Here she started to scream. The Count was very aware of his position in society and treated her like a nobody, but the Archduke invited her to a reception. She can't help but give at least a modest gift as a token of gratitude, and her husband's bitter face no longer worries her too much. The girl took the gift and held it tightly against her chest. Poor real Rosie, even treating herself so terribly, tried to win Eric's love, although there is absolutely nothing to love in this man. Late at night, the family's carriage vans headed to the reception venue. The Duke sat silently in front of his wife and looked at her. A tense and heavy silence hung between the spouses. It would have been better if he hadn't gone to the party with Rosie. Then it would have been more useful to make that strange husband feel bad. The carriage stopped, the wheels creaked, and the coachman's voice announced they had arrived. The Count simply got out of the carriage, even out of pure etiquette, refusing to help his wife get out. But the Countess expected nothing good from this scoundrel, and holding firmly, finally the gift in her hands, she began to get down from the carriage. Unfortunately, the girl tripped on her own dress and began to fall. Now she will fall to the ground and her dress will be ruined. She will have to return to her estate without being able to attend the banquet. As sad as it sounds, fortunately, Archduke Arturo was passing by and the girl fell into his strong and gentle arms. The man skillfully lifted the Countess and carefully set her down on the ground. The young woman was surprised at how quickly they met, and Arthur was glad the girl stepped away half a step from the boy to speak to him normally. Arthur was glad to have arrived on time and gladly offered to accompany her since there was no one else who could accompany her. Like a surprised doll, Count Eric burst into the conversation, grabbing roughly and forcefully the girl's hand and interrupting Arthur. According to him, a married countess cannot appear alone. Eric is there as her husband, who watches over her virtue, and judging by Arthur's concern, it turns out he is very interested in the Count's wife. The Archduke noticed how tightly the Count was squeezing the delicate hand of the Countess. Arthur thought that the Count, Eric, was not showing his wife the attention she deserved. Eric didn't even help her get out of the carriage. That's why Arthur decided to help, and did so out of pure courtesy. At the same time as the Archduke pulled his hand away from the Count, from the tender wrist of the Countess, Eric was outraged by this. Arthur calmly suggested that it would be better to let go of the girl's hand before a bruise formed, and instead of mutilating her, it would be better to spend a pleasant moment with his wife. The Count made an aggressive bow and admitted he had been distracted. He assured Arthur he would spend a pleasant time with his wife. The man looked at the Archduke with a blank stare. Clearly knowing more than he let on, Eric advised the Archduke that when greeting the other noble guests, they should give their full attention to the Vans family. Arthur approached the Count and whispered an important piece of advice. Sometimes to achieve a goal, Eric, you have to hide your claws. The Archduke himself is now eager to tear the Count's vile tongue out. Arthur only pretends to be kind to Eric and advises him that the Count should also attack the actor. Otherwise, he will seem like a spoiled young man. Arthur asked the Count to be less emotional at the banquet, and not spoil the mood of everyone present. The Archduke continued walking, ignoring the Count's aggressive teeth grinding. After that, Eric called Arthur a bastard, but still took his words into account. The Count's aggressive and hateful gaze fell on Rosie. His wife irritated him. Eric pointed at the Countess and ordered her to go back and wait for him. And no nonsense, and the Count went in the opposite direction of the entrance, leaving his wife alone on the threshold. The girl was initially paralyzed. She didn't know what to do. The Countess had to enter the room alone. Her husband had left and Arthur was scared, so she had no escort. The herald's voice announced her name as soon as she crossed the threshold of the ballroom. The girl got nervous, but mentally calmed herself. If she stays calm, there will be no problems. She is here to meet people. The crowd began whispering around her. She is the same Countess that not even her own husband notices. Most likely he dragged her out from behind the Count like a puppy. It's rumored she leads a miserable life. Anyone in her place would have committed suicide long ago, seeing the way he treats her. Her husband seems to have no pride. It turns out that making friends is harder than Rosie expected, but she can't give up so easily. The girl headed like a perky person toward the crowd, toward the tables with sweets and drinks first. You need to eat something, drink something, and wait for the right moment. Someone waved a glass of champagne in front of the girl, catching the attention of her crimson eyes. It is Archduke Arthur, who tries with all his might to attract the attention of Countess Vans toward his high-ranking person. Arthur asked about the condition of the girl's wrist. He saw how tightly Eric was squeezing it. He had been worried about it all this time. Rosie thanked Arthur for his concern, and what had happened earlier, she was very grateful that the blonde caught her. Arthur was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and finally the young man asked the question he was interested in. How did the girl know the tears of the moon were fake? So he found out the real reason she was invited to the reception. Well, Arthur surely wouldn't believe he read it in a novel. The girl justified herself, saying she had heard that the real tears of the moon in the moonlight have a reddish tint, unlike the auction decoration. Arthur doubted the girl's words. In his opinion, a single sign was not enough to judge the authenticity of the jewels. Tears of the Moon was a very special and unique necklace. Rosie hoped that was a strong enough argument the girl wanted to leave to avoid more discomfort, and wished the Archduke good night before leaving. With a gentle wave of her hand, Arthur stopped the pink-haired girl. He asked her not to leave so hastily, but instead invited her to dance. The girl was worried. She considered herself a married woman and didn't want to get involved in this, but her husband wasn't nearby. Arthur pointed out to Rosie that her husband was already spending time with another lady, so she could afford to dance with him for a while. Rosie was very outraged by Eric's insolence. That is to say, she had to stay near the door and not show herself, and he could communicate with anyone. Rosie happily agreed to dance with the Emperor's son, but husbands really are useless. Arthur noticed the girl danced very clumsily. Someone seriously thinks that in a past life the girl was dedicated to dancing. She only had a few free hours and spent them on physics. Additionally, the girl moved her legs clumsily, trying not to step on her partner's foot. Arthur calmed the girl, telling her not to rush, that he really cared about her and wouldn't let her fall. Arthur looked at the girl with such tenderness that not even her ex-husband from her first life looked at her with that tenderness. It turns out the first impression was misleading. Arthur is not cruel or scary at all. The pink-haired girl thanked the Archduke for the dance. She was very happy that the Archduke took the time to see her. Immediately the girl heard the whispers of the crowd. People whispered very disdainfully about her and Arthur. According to the crowd, Rosie was worthless, probably because she didn't even have a proper debut. Rosie really isn't anything special. With such communication and dancing skills, no one would show up. It must be almost impossible for the Count to live with her. Eric approached his wife from behind and grabbed her roughly by the bare shoulders. She was dishonoring him and herself. Not only could she not stay still, but she also decided to dance like an archduke. Eric gritted his teeth threateningly and ordered the girls to leave. The Count demanded that his wife stop behaving inappropriately. The man thought Rosie threatened Arthur by dancing to get her husband's attention, but her behavior only pushes her husband away. He still thinks she's a woman who begs for his attention. However, the Count admitted that lately he had been completely inattentive to his wife. The man pulled the girl around her waist tightly, hugging her in a rough embrace. The girl was outraged by the actions of her unwanted husband. Unlike a real Rosie, she didn't like this. According to the Count, his wife has the right to be angry because he hasn't hugged her for 3 weeks and she must have missed it. The man was about to give his wife a proper hug to make her read everything they had missed. To the Count's surprise, Rosie pushed him away as she didn't want either his attention or his contact at all. According to Rosie, Eric has drunk too much and is out of control of his actions. In short, Rosie went to rest, blatantly ignoring all of Eric's attempts to appease her, which surprised the man. Rosie turned around and walked away from her husband, paying no attention to his attempts to stop her. In the Count's eyes, this seemed strange. Lately, Rosie had been constantly avoiding him, although the atmosphere at that moment had been quite favorable in the Count's opinion. Eric didn't suffer much. He saw a pretty maiden and decided to flirt with her that night. In fact, who cares about his wife's condition? This problem can be easily solved, and meanwhile the Count will take care of the beautiful maiden. It seems the Count only has one thing on his mind. Behaving so disgustingly in decent society, it's terrible. Rosie was distracted from her thoughts by a cry for help. The girl immediately jumped up and headed toward the source of the sound. The girl thought someone was dying. Really, it's such a cruel novel. The Countess's body froze, completely disobeying her lady, and even refusing to move. She needs to flee from here before the one harassing the other person notices her. The second life can't end so quickly. Archduke Arthur stepped out from the corner. For some reason, there was blood on his suit. Although he called the Countess as sweetly as always, Rosie was surprised to see the Archduke there, but Arthur's presence did not calm her. Arthur asked about the girl's condition and what she was doing there alone. The Duke of Samara was completely covered in red liquid as if he had killed a man. The Archduke pulled his hands away from the Countess. Because it was rude to extend hands stained with blood to a girl, Rosie began to cry and swear she would pretend that she hadn't seen all the indecency that Arthur had committed. Rosie admits she believes Arthur just killed someone and promises to pretend she didn't notice. The young man bowed politely and asked her with a smile if the girl really believed he was the murderer. Rosie referred to a scream that came roughly from the same area where it had come from. Arthur, the girl heard a scream, and then the Archduke appeared. Covered in blood, naturally she assumed he was the murderer. Moreover, if someone dies at his banquet, he will be the one with the most trouble, so this idea is stupid. Well, Arthur admitted that his appearance could really raise questions, so he extended his hand toward the girl, inviting her that if Rosie follows him, he will show her the answer to all the questions she has now. The girl looked at Arthur with interest and confusion and agreed to check if her guesses were correct. The Archduke took Rosie to the crime scene. The entire lawn was covered in blood. It turns out the Marquis of Blend was attacked by a monster, and the Archduke saved the guest. And the blood is on Arthur because he was checking if the Marquis was breathing, and it was at that moment that he heard Rosie's footsteps. Now the monster has disappeared without a trace, and what really happened turned out to be a big misunderstanding. The palace guards went directly to the crime scene and surrounded the Archduke, accusing him of murder. The man with the interesting mustache was the leader of the guard procession. He suspected that sooner or later something like this would happen. This is Duke Blish, and he suspected that sooner or later something like this would happen. According to the Duke, it was necessary to choose better whom to attack. And touching the Marquis of Blend, who was also His Majesty the Emperor's favorite, was a bad idea. So that's all. No wonder everything seemed so strange from the beginning. They tried to set a trap for Arthur. He will really have to reveal all his cards now unexpectedly for the Archduke and the guards. Rosie stepped out to protect Arthur. The girl protected Arthur from the knights. She demanded that the procession of accusations stop. She was willing to testify that the Archduke was innocent. Rosie claims that the Archduke Arthur is completely innocent of what happened with what arguments. Did Rosie dare to block Duke Plish's path? Questions came from all sides. Rosie claims to have seen the Archduke save Duke Blade, who was being attacked by a monster. In fact, Duke Plish is one of those conspiring against Arthur. This time, they miscalculated and had a witness. Other guests arrived. Due to the noise, the Duke gathered people for some important matter. Everyone noticed Rosie. This only benefited Plish. Rosie has a very bad reputation. She is not an obstacle for them. The Duke decided to take advantage of this because the Countess, who should be at the reception with her husband, was there with the Archduke. This kind of attack did not surprise the pink-haired girl at all. Plish noticed that Rosie's dress was terribly dirty, as if she had been lying somewhere. Plish thought that was the end of the conversation and that Rosie would back down. To save her husband's reputation, the girl realized that Duke Plish wanted to involve her and force her to withdraw or testify against Arthur. Rosie pretended to be upset and hid her eyes between her hands. She said she came here with her husband and got lost in the garden. The monster that appeared did not suddenly attack her, but Duke RTS scared it away and saved her. If it weren't for Arthur, Rosie would have also died. Just like Duke Blade, Plish got worried and demanded that the monster be handed over to him. Arthur looked at the pink-haired girl. With a slightly confused expression, Rosie continued her story. She briefly left to bring a man to help the Duke, and during this time the monster disappeared without a trace. The girl turned to Arthur and winked at him. Happily, she was definitely on the Archduke's side. Arthur supported the Countess's idea. Most likely the creature was in its last moments, and its corpse would soon be found somewhere in the garden. The Duke Plish was terribly angry. His plan to frame Archduke Arthur had failed. Now it was impossible to present the situation in a way that Arthur could be accused of murder. Premeditated, but Duke Plish asked to do everything discreetly without a single witness, but his subordinates failed again. The crowd began to whisper. No one doubted Arthur's pure intentions. Everyone was more worried about where the monster had gone. The Duke Plish started nervously shifting his gaze from side to side. There had to be at least the slightest chance that everything could turn in his favor. Plish would surely thank the Countess for today's business to appear acceptable in the eyes of the public. The Duke Plish is His Majesty the Emperor's closest ally, who after squeezing everything possible sends Count Vance to the scrap heap. The girl made a bow courteously and apologized if she had been rude to the Duke. Most likely the criminal had Archduke Arthur as a target. Rosie reasoned, asked to send her best wishes to the Count, and was now being skillfully used. Corruption? She headed toward the carriages and Arthur followed her. The girl stopped. Drawing attention with the loud click of her heels, the girl turned to the Archduke and demanded he say what he wanted, and stopped chasing her. The Archduke playfully leaned toward the Countess and admitted he simply felt very curious about the girl's behavior. In such a situation, love would simply disappear. So why did Rosie believe in Arthur and help him? Rosie was a little puzzled by this question. She did not expect so much interest. Terrible rumors run about Arthur. It's impossible that the Countess hadn't heard them in the country. They say Archduke Arthur is cruel and bloodthirsty and does not hesitate to kill those he dislikes. She smiled at Arthur with a smile. He also believed her at the auction, which meant they were even that night. It was Arthur who made an effort to listen to the common lady, and anyone else would have simply ignored her. Then Rosie decided to help the wonderful gentleman who once believed in her. The Duke gently placed his hand on the girl's cheek, which embarrassed the Countess. If she could thank her savior somehow, she would gladly fulfill any wish of the Countess. The girl felt embarrassed and moved away from the Archduke. Eric had not helped her for a reward, although there was still one thing she might need help with. She wants a divorce. She needs Arthur to help her divorce Count Eric. Arthur was surprised by the request. He doubted the girl really wanted the divorce. Rosie confirmed her desire. Count Eric is a terrible person, and the girl wants to correct the mistake of her youth and stop living with the abuser. The Archduke laughed in response to the pink-haired girl's request, which embarrassed her a little. Arthur took Rosie's hand and said her idea was wonderful and reminded her that her parents would be very happy about it for some reason. The Archduke knows how the Soviet counts feel. He contacted them because of Rosie. The parents are very worried about the pink-haired girl and hope she is okay, even though she made such a stupid decision. Rosie's parents believed in her and waited for her return for 3 whole years. The father and mother never forgot the prodigal daughter. They missed her all the time and prayed for her soul. Rosie asked Arthur to tell her parents she would visit them soon. The Archduke smiled approvingly at the girl's decisions. Arthur agreed to fulfill the girl's request and asked when she would get divorced, to which he received the answer as soon as possible recently. The marriage and divorce procedure has been greatly simplified, so it's not difficult. You just have to put a stamp on the documents, submit them, and get approval, but the Archduke can't do anything about it. So Rosie should ask for something else. What would a girl want that Arthur could get? Rosie awkwardly squeezed her wrist with her hand. There was one more request, but it was uncomfortable to express it. The Archduke. Arthur looked condescendingly at the embarrassed girl. The girl asked Arthur to lend her some money. She was very embarrassed to ask a person for money. Rosie never stopped surprising him. Arthur laughed, and the girl asked him to take her request seriously. The sweet conversation between the Countess and the Archduke was overheard by Count Eric, who was passing by. The Countess's husband's shout distracted the couple from their pleasant conversation. A disheveled Eric approached the Countess and the Archduke while curses against his wife came from his lips. The Countess and the Archduke noticed the ugly appearance of Count Vance. Rose felt uncomfortable because of her husband's appearance. This man had no shame or conscience. It wasn't even necessary to look to understand what he was doing, and the Count kept shouting that if his wife didn't come to him immediately, he would simply leave. The girl smiled sweetly at Arthur and asked him to continue the discussion a little later, otherwise her foolish husband would be demanding her attention. The Archduke said he would soon send a man to the Vance County. To negotiate, Rosie began to reject such an offer. Eric caused an uproar with a single gift. And if he also receives a message from Arthur, things will be even worse. Eric will criticize her for all kinds of trivialities and harass her. So it will be her who will get in touch with the Archduke. The girl stepped away from Arthur and went toward her husband. She said goodbye sweetly and promised to see him again soon. Everything that happened greatly surprised the Archduke. The Countess changed her actions so quickly Arthur didn't understand if the Countess had really asked him for money, or if she was simply trying somehow to continue the relationship. You want a woman who is intelligent, but who is clumsy in communication and in making connections. Arthur went out to the lake to clear his mind and to think thoroughly about the Countess's behavior. If you think about it, anyone could have misunderstood the Countess's request, and the fact that he didn't shout was already a miracle. Arthur was called by the voice of his loyal servant. In fact, he decided to meet his scout at the lake. The scout found out everything, and as the master ordered, the people who were there in the ambush turned out to be subordinates of Duke Plish. How dare this bald Plish point a sword at the Archduke? The insolent rat is becoming bolder and bolder, and it needs to be dealt with without unnecessary problems. Arthur also ordered that a man be assigned to the Countess. She needs an escort until she leaves because she saved the Archduke. Arthur finally returned to his room. The guy had a pile of papers to review. Arthur asked Nerwan, his secretary, if there was any new letter. The secretary didn't understand why the Archduke asked every hour about new letters, but he informed him that there was a letter from the Imperial Palace. Arthur doesn't talk about Imperial letters. He's interested in other addresses that unfortunately don't exist. The red-haired secretary was already tired of answering the same question every time. Even though the Archduke had ordered to expel anyone who came to him, he was still waiting for some guest of the Duke. He thought that if he had ordered everyone out, then the expected guest would also be expelled, and that's really why they showed the door to the girl he was waiting for. The secretary hurried to reassure the gentleman. No one approached the threshold. The Archduke was pressed against the window, watching for a certain figure. Finally, he saw Rosie, who had done everything possible to disguise herself, so no one would recognize her. Rosie arrived. The girl ran around the door, and if the Duke didn't recognize her, he chased her away. The girl began to think about all the worst possible scenarios. She thought the Duke would say he only spoke to her out of pity and that she had acted foolishly by coming here. She was worried about having nothing more to say to the Duke and that he would demand she be quiet and leave. The girl was gathering her strength, and just as she was about to enter through the door, the guards called her. One of the knights ran into a girl. She was acting very suspiciously, lurking near the Imperial gate since early morning. The girl said she came to see the Archduke to give him something from her master, and the guard demanded she show him that thing. Rosie tried to downplay it. That thing had to be delivered personally, but they wouldn't let her pass until she showed it. As if hearing her prayers, the secretary appeared and demanded she be let in since she was the Archduke's guest. The guards immediately began to carry out the order of the high-ranking servant, and Rosie realized that Arthur had been eagerly awaiting her visit. The secretary apologized for the inconvenience and invited the girl to follow him, hoping that Rosie would forgive them. However, the girl insisted that everything was absolutely fine and that she would like to see the Archduke as soon as possible, but the secretary asked her to wait a little. The butler ordered the maids to bring tea and refreshments for the esteemed guest. The butler seems to be about the same age as Rosie and is already a butler, which is surprising. The butler reported that Archduke Arthur was eagerly waiting for Rosie and would arrive at any moment. The butler offered the girl some tea until the gentleman deigned to appear, and as if it were planned, the Archduke appeared at the door and cheerfully greeted the guest. I was already afraid there would be no news from Rosie. The butler happily noticed that Arthur had changed clothes and had groomed himself before meeting the girl. Meanwhile, in the lair of the main villains, who were thinking of eliminating Arthur, if the plan had succeeded that day, the team of bastards would have gotten rid of the Archduke much faster. But it turns out that Count Vance has a very good wife, who gets involved in things she shouldn't. Eric was condemned for not even being able to watch her, but instead basically running after the maids. As always, most likely, as we already know, it turned out to be true. The Count was found again in the arms of some woman, whom the boss asked to stop ruining the Count's reputation. The man apologized. Maybe he rushed and misjudged the situation, but Eric's embarrassed face told the whole story. The leader himself will talk to Eric and demand that this never happens again. The leader himself will have a serious conversation with Count Vance and discuss his behavior. Because of a girl, Eric put the entire operation at risk. The boss roughly pushed the Count to the ground and demanded he get rid of Rosie. By any means necessary, Duke Plish knew that letting the damn servant into the house was the worst possible idea. Eric was given a month to get rid of his wife's presence in his life. In these 30 days, Count Eric must make the right decision at the same time. At Arthur's estate, a meeting took place between the owner and Rosie. Arthur did not expect Rosie to disguise herself before the visit. In fact, if it were known that the girl was here, nothing good would happen to her. Because of the wig, the Archduke compared the girl to his puppy, who also looks cute and has the same fur color as the girl's wig. Polina touched the girl's hair, gently tucking the strands behind her ear. Arthur couldn't help but admit that Rosie and his dog were almost the same person, so he couldn't help but pet her. Rosie set aside the Archduke's worries and took off the wig inwardly. She was outraged at being compared to an animal. In any case, Rosie gave a gift to the Archduke. Before they began discussing urgent matters, she wanted to give it to him at the last banquet, but due to certain events she couldn't. It would be great to give it as a reward for the help, but it happened that she was too distracted and accidentally took the gift to the Van's estate. The girl gave a gift to Arthur. There was nothing special about the box, but she would have been very happy if the young man had accepted it with some disbelief. Arthur asked again if the gift had really been personally prepared by the Countess, to which the girl felt most likely for a member of the imperial family. The gift seemed too modest, thought the pink-haired girl, if he doesn't like it. Rosie is ready to prepare something better next time and will be able to make up for this occasion. However, Arthur was more than satisfied with everything. The gift was prepared sincerely and from the heart, so it will be wonderful in any case. Inside the box was thrown a topaz, a large one, whose color resembled Arthur's eyes. The man rarely wears this type of jewelry, but he really likes the brooch. The man looked at the girl, analyzing her emotions and condition. The girl looked at the Archduke with hope, hoping he would say something about her gift. The same man placed the jewel on the lapel of his vest and said that the brooch looked very good. Rosie noticed the brooch was a little crooked, so she laughed and stepped closer. The girl adjusted the brooch on the young man's chest, while Arthur did not take his eyes off Rosie. The girl asked if Arthur knew what topaz meant. Watching closely the girl's hand movements, Arthur agreed to listen. Topaz has healing properties, so often it is given to wish good luck in battle. According to the plot of the novel, the Archduke will soon disappear, and this fact could be ignored, but the girl looked sadly into the Archduke's eyes. She was very impressed with him. The girl looked away sadly. It was up to Arthur to decide whether to believe her or not, but she wanted to warn him that he would soon be framed and executed. Arthur raised his eyebrows in surprise and looked at the serious and sad girl. Rosie admitted she did not want the Archduke to die, and this brooch also conveys her hope that everything will be fine. The main thing is that she spoke, and what to do next will be decided by the Archduke. It would be better, of course, to postpone this conversation until trust is established between them, but she might not have time to warn him, so it is better to avoid the execution. While there is still a chance, the man smiled and calmly addressed the girl after the incident with the necklace. He had no doubts about her. He asked the lady if she knew how to avoid his death, and the girl was surprised that Arthur believed her. The man understood the girl's concern, and he said to her in a loud voice that he truly trusted her like no one else. After all, she had already saved him once, so he asked her to tell him more about her upcoming execution. At the same time, at the Van's estate, Rosie's double nervously waited for the lady near the window. The Countess said she would return before dinner, but dinner had long since passed. In the morning, Rosie gave a wig to one of her maids and ordered her to pretend to be her. According to the legend, Rosie was not feeling well, so no one would come. The maid Jane would just have to wait until dinner. Suddenly, the doors to the Countess's chambers creaked open. The girl was asked to leave the medicine on the table near the entrance and leave the room. She didn't realize that the medicine had been brought by none other than Count Eric. The man noticed that even the girl's voice had changed, which indicated that indeed she was very sick. The maid was surprised the Count shouldn't have entered the room and Jane would be exposed. The man left the medicine on the table with a slight clink, and the girl asked why they hadn't sent a maid. The man wrapped his arm around her slender waist and told her he considered it necessary to spend time alone with her. In a rough voice, the man demanded that Rosie tell him what she was hiding. The man grabbed the girl by the neck and squeezed tightly, leaving bruises on her pale skin because of Rosie. The Count had to endure the humiliation of his peers, so he wanted to teach his wife a lesson, and the loyal servant was glad that the Countess wasn't there and that the Count didn't hurt her. Suddenly the door to the room opened again and Doña entered. The blonde had been looking for a lover for a long time and asked the Count to go with her for a while. The Count was not happy to be distracted, but let his wife's double go. The man left with the blonde because an urgent matter had come up, and Eric finally said that his wife was nothing but trouble. Rosie's double dropped to her knees in front of the window. She was very scared. Jane begged Madame to come quickly, because if they found out, something very terrible could happen. Meanwhile, at Arthur's estate, the real Rosie was giving advice to the Archduke on how to survive the girl's words about him being considered the crown's main pain. The madman of the north and the empire's executioner partially hurt the young man in reality. Everything was more serious than it seemed, but Arthur felt increasingly uncomfortable with this realization with every word. Some strange noises distracted the girl from her monologue directed at Arthur. The Archduke's puppy ran toward his owner and accidentally knocked over a vase. To help Rosie, Arthur used magic. And the girl didn't step on a shard but on a magic circle. The Archduke picked up the Countess in his arms and didn't let her fall to the ground again. Arthur was worried that the girl was hurt. He was sincerely concerned about the pink-haired girl. Rosie was not hurt, but she was very wet from the vase the puppy knocked over. In summer, the butler ran into the room after the dog, shouting its name and the order to come back, but the dog didn't care. It went to its beloved owner and was happy. The butler apologized, and suddenly the dog broke free and ran off. Rosie thought about what had just happened and felt as if she were floating. She decided to ask Arthur directly if he had jumped from surprise when he caught her. The butler holding the dog watched all this. He understood exactly what had just happened. The butler's soul sank to his heels. He realized that once again his master had done something stupid. The butler immediately tried to change the subject. He noticed that the girl's clothes were completely wet and that she should go change. Rosie declined the butler's offer, and suddenly, Arthur's shirt fell over her shoulders. On the other hand, she was surprised by Arthur's actions. Why he undressed and put a shirt on her The Archduke said he was afraid Rosie would catch a cold and that he didn't want that to happen. Arthur asked the girl to wait for him there for a while and left the room. Rosie hoped that one day she would be asked directly about what happened. The butler told the master not to use magic, and more than once, Arthur argued that he couldn't do anything else, and since the Archduke showed so much concern for Rosie, probably needless to say, he has everything under control after changing clothes. Arthur returned with Rosie and continued the conversation with her about how his reputation and his death were connected. The girl cleared her throat, preparing for a long conversation. She must have left Arthur puzzled, but she is right. Recently, she saw a document in Eric's office that recorded his intentions with other nobles to harm the Archduke. She couldn't see more details, but they were going to use his bad reputation to execute him later. If you remember what happened at the banquet, you can see that everyone who was around gathered as if someone called them. Rosie is sure this is part of the plan. The girl has gathered a lot of circumstantial evidence, so it will be useless. To appeal to a higher authority, the brief pause made Arthur feel a little uncomfortable. It's clear there is no evidence, and the case of the Empress can be left unmentioned. There are already enough people involved in the case, and most likely the Count Eric shares the Duke's opinions, Bleach, but Rosie is prepared and trusts that she can save the life of the Archduke of Artois. Arthur, of course, trusts Rosie, but his expression screams that he is hiding something, and even if the Countess is not a spy, you have to be careful with her while she lives with Count Vance. The more information she has, the greater the threat to Arthur's and her lives. According to the Emperor's supporters, the Archduke decided to play along with the girl. He said he felt indebted to her once again, but in reality he decided it was too dangerous to reveal all his cards to the Countess. Now, meanwhile, Arthur interrupted the Countess, which surprised the girl. Arthur wanted to reward the girl for such important services. He wanted to solve the problem with the money he asked for. The girl said this topic would allow them both to take a break from hiding their secrets. Rosie noticed that Arthur had changed the subject quite abruptly and quickly, but if he kept pressing, he would only raise suspicions, so he had already said enough for today. Rosie happily agreed to start developing this topic. She would need funds for the divorce. The Archduke asked the young Countess to be shy and to ask for whatever she wanted. Suddenly the Countess clung to him and murmured, embarrassed, that she would settle for any amount that Arthur didn't mind. The Archduke could easily give 100 million, so the Countess needed to be more precise. Arthur thought proudly. The girl still shocked the Archduke. She asked for 10 billion. And even Arthur choked on such an amount. Rosie began to convince Arthur that she wasn't just asking for a loan. She was sure she could pay back every penny. The Archduke was stunned by the Countess's request to lend her 10 billion rubles, and even by her guarantees to pay back every penny. With this money, one could buy an entire region of the empire. Rosie hoped Arthur would help her. That would be great. The woman understood perfectly that it was a very large sum, and was surprised when the Archduke agreed to lend it to her without much persuasion. But everything turned out too easy. Rosie didn't expect it. Before giving the money to the lady, he asked her to answer a question. Rosie was surprised and a little scared again. Arthur was very interested in what the Countess was going to do with such a large sum of money. The woman wondered what was better for her, to tell the Archduke the truth or lie convincingly. The woman was in a good mood, since her problems would be solved much more easily than she had imagined. If Arthur supported her financially, her plan would come true much faster. Rosie explained to the Archduke that after the divorce she would dedicate herself to the department store business. Arthur got interested and asked her to tell him more. The man looked at the Countess like a schoolboy, with his mouth almost open in surprise. Rosie felt like a true teacher, ready to preach something reasonable, kind, and eternal to the young. The woman explained that a department store is a building designed exclusively for shopping, with many small shops located under one roof. The shopping areas that exist today are certainly good, but the shops in them are located in a disorganized way. To find the right product, you have to go everywhere or place individual orders. Rosie believed that the new infrastructure would be more than competitive with the current galleries and commercial areas. Arthur decided that Rosie would build a huge building. He would rent space in it and charge rent to the merchants. The woman said that instead of rent, she would charge the merchants a commission on sales. She also planned to allow the entry of luxury items into the department stores, and instead of supervising production, Rosie planned to increase the price of the products by 30% over the original price. Arthur understood the woman's idea. The cost and quality of the products would increase, and the goods would become prestigious, which would perfectly satisfy the vanity of the aristocrats. The absence of rent would benefit the merchants and the nobles. They would prefer to go shopping at a place with easy and quick access, and where everything is luxuriously furnished. Rosie asked Arthur what he thought about whether it was worth investing in such a business and if it would be profitable. The Crown Prince liked the Countess's idea. It promised to bring great benefits. The Count's mansion is wrapped in the darkness of the night. Countess Rosie was hidden among the bushes. She needed to get to her room as quickly as possible. The conversation with the Archduke had dragged on, and the Countess promised to return no later than 7. Jay was probably very worried. Approaching the mansion walls, Rosie noticed that the light in the windows of her room was not on. Her faithful maid must have fallen asleep. The woman nervously called the maid by her name, and then someone's hand fell on her shoulder. The woman was terrified. Above all, she was afraid that the Count would find out about her outing. But it was her faithful knight Seren who asked the lady not to scream. The knight said he had come for Lady Rosie. She was surprised that he came and not Jane. As they had agreed, the boy explained that the lady would arrive very late. So Seren volunteered. He took the Countess in his arms and promised to enter the mansion as quietly as possible. The Countess would have to be patient as he would take her to the room. The knight walked with stealthy steps toward the Countess's room. The Countess asked if anything had happened. While she was out, Saren hesitated, still doubting whether to tell the Countess about this incident. The boy remembered how Jane asked him not to say that the owner tried to strangle her. Saren thought Madame should know about this, however the girl claimed that since Madame Rose loved the knight very much, even though he treated her with disdain, it would hurt her to hear it if Rosie found out about this incident. Her heart, which was already beating with difficulty, would definitely stop. The boy remembered that the girl asked him to keep silent for her own good. Saren told nothing to the Lady Rosie and claimed that everything in the mansion was in perfect order. At the same time, in Eric's bedroom, Donya woke up and tried to find out if the Count was sleeping deeply. Eric was rude to Donna and told her he wanted to lie down in silence. Donna was outraged because the Count was in a bad mood again. The woman asked what had really happened at that reception. She and the lady hadn't spoken for several days and had even eaten separately. The Count remained silently dissatisfied. He didn't want to be frank with his lover. After a while, Eric said that Rose had changed a lot lately. She had become arrogant and too insolent. Donna immediately began to recount what the Countess said. Donna was tired of adapting to her husband, and how she just wanted to take a break from him. Donna assumed that the Count was simply boring his wife. Eric was outraged he had spoiled Rosie so much and she was paying him back with black ingratitude. The man believed he shouldn't say those things and he wouldn't let it go. Donna smiled smugly, anticipating a new scandal in the Count's family. The Count's words that he would divorce his wife in about a month became a bomb for Donna. The woman was interested in how Rose would react when this news reached her. In the morning, Donna hurried to go to Countess Rosie's room. She sat quietly at the table and organized some papers. Without looking up from her work, Rosie asked what was worrying Donna so much. The blonde sat at the Countess's table and said she felt that Rosie's relationship with the Count was really bad. Rosie became alert, ready to listen and not react. The woman said that the Count might be offended for not having hugged him for several days, but that it wasn't a big deal, that Donna would soon fix everything. She chuckled. How would she fix it? Eric was already talking about divorce, and Rosie was a real bitch. She knew how to throw dust in people's eyes. Donna warned Rosie that men don't like to be pressured and added that Alex really didn't have that. Rosie pretended not to know what they were talking about and asked who Alex was. Donna replied that he was her husband from a past life. This guy had nothing special to brag about, so he kept being enthusiastic about her, but it was in vain. Rosie's hand trembled with indignation, and the pen left a big stain on the paper. Donna realized she had strayed from the topic and advised Rosie to make an effort to get the man to communicate with her. Rosie responded that it wasn't a very good idea with her husband. He didn't like women who were too proactive. Donna insisted it wasn't Rosie's place to teach him. The woman immediately realized the harshness of her tone, apologized, and asked to be understood correctly. Because friends need to point out mistakes, Rosie should be sure she could always trust her, Donna urged the Countess. The next day, guests were expected at Count Vance's mansion. They received the ex-Count Cedric. Cedric got out of the carriage. The guest declared that greetings and bows were unnecessary and ordered that Rosie be called. The best room in the mansion was waiting for the dear guest. Father Eric Rosie asked his father-in-law why he had arrived without warning. Cedric Devon was furious and declared that Rosie inherited her boldness and sweet face from her mother. Cedric praised his daughter-in-law for her good performance and asked if she really didn't know why he was there. Rosie replied that she didn't know the reason for his sudden visit. Cedric struck his cane hard against the floor. The Countess was paralyzed with surprise. The man shouted loudly, if Rosie can't help her husband, then at least she shouldn't get in his way. How much longer will he have to be disappointed in them fools? Rosie listened disheartened to her father-in-law's reprimands about how she didn't take good care of her husband and that he went wherever he wanted. Cedric instilled in the girl that now it was impossible to openly take anyone's side, and that it was necessary to maintain complete neutrality. Rosie understood that Cedric was saying all those right words with only one purpose. The father-in-law was terribly displeased because Rosie supported the Archduke. The woman couldn't hold back her emotions. Rosie said her husband was acting like an idiot and that everything that had happened was entirely his fault. The Countess was outraged because she was the only thorn in her father-in-law's side. And what about her son? The woman promised to leave that damn house and break up with Eric immediately. Rosie really wanted to do exactly as described, but that would give him a reason to cling to her, and then it would be difficult to get a divorce. Rosie bowed to her father-in-law and apologized for her short-sightedness. Cedric looked at the woman with hostility and thought there was nothing more to expect. From the Serviante lineage of Rosie, decided that his father-in-law was a very unpleasant guy and that if Margaret had been there, she would have simply killed him. Cedric was standing in the center of the room with burning eyes. Rosie was much shorter than Cedric, but just as tenacious. Cedric's servant appeared in the room and announced that he would soon have another meeting and that it was time to say goodbye to his daughter-in-law. Cedric looked toward the servant. The guy was firm and silent as a rock. Cedric was about to leave his son's mansion and said goodbye, saying he had come today with a warning and hoped she had listened, and that next time, words alone wouldn't work. Rosie wondered if her father-in-law had come to the mansion just to scold his negligent daughter-in-law. Something was wrong here. Cedric stayed in the hallway and asked his secretary if Litot had handled the task he had assigned. The boy reported that he left everything he asked for in Rosie's room. Cedric expressed full confidence that Rosie would remain silent for a while. Cedric considered his daughter-in-law a great honor. Cedric and his assistant without leaving the mansion. Met at a small metal door. The guy said they were already there. Cedric wanted to finish this matter as quickly as possible. The entire conversation was overheard by Jane the maid. The girl was puzzled by what he was hiding Cedric had forgotten in his mansion. Cedric entered a secluded part of the mansion where there was almost never anyone. Jane decided that definitely something was wrong and that she needed to watch Cedric and his servant. The girl suddenly became all ears and observant. Saren appeared in front of Cedric and greeted him. As Master Saren was serious and stern, Jane didn't quite understand where he came from or what he was doing there. Cedric asked Saren if the Archduke Arthur and Rosie had met again. Saren replied that such a thing had never happened. As the knight knows, Cedric reported after the first meeting at the auction, and Madame's invitation to her reception no other communication was mentioned. Cedric asked again if Rosie and Arthur had ever met in person. Jane remembered having helped Madame leave the house to meet the Archduke. The girl trembled and decided that if Cedric told this now, then they would be lost. Maybe she should intervene for now, however. Saren did not reveal the Countess's secret and did not tell Cedric anything about her personal meeting with Arthur. Jane listened to Cedric giving instructions to Saren that the Countess must not approach Arthur. Princess Diana's birthday is approaching, and for the toast she will receive a glass from Arthur's hands, but the glass has already been replaced with a normal one. And she is unable to distinguish between poisons. The princess will faint, and the Archduke will be arrested on the spot. Without even time to say a word, Saren asked if the Emperor approved this plan. Cedric confirmed that the Emperor agreed, but asked to ensure that the antidote worked and that his daughter would remain alive. Cedric ordered Saren that the boy make sure that Rosie did not contact the Archduke before that moment. The Count said he only counted on Saren and passed through the secret door. Saren wished Master Cedric a good trip. The boy stood frozen and listened with silent steps. The night of the Countess approached the place where he was hiding. Saren asked if she could see and hear everything clearly. Jane was afraid that now Saren would silence her forever. The boy remained significantly silent. Jane said she didn't want anyone to die or get hurt. Saren listened carefully to Jane. The girl said she now has a special fear of depending on others. Jane walked away from Saren and walked down the hall, forbidding the boy to call her by her name and look her in the eyes. The boy tried in vain to shout at the girl. Jane felt that out of love for Madame, she had to do what she had to do. Meanwhile, in the Countess Rosie's chambers, the following events occurred. The small and tempting box was in the most prominent place amid the commotion in the house. Doña escaped to the Countess's room under the pretext of cleaning. The woman immediately saw the box and grabbed it. She decided it was expensive cosmetics, but when she saw the handwriting on the card that looked like a tally, the woman got upset. If this is a gift from the Count to Rosie, then it means who had been having an affair behind her back. Donna promising to divorce him and keeping her in a secondary role. Donna thought a lot about how to get revenge on Rosie, her homewrecker. Without further ado, Donna decided to take the cosmetics for herself. Donna opened the box decisively and found powder inside. The woman applied some powder to Donna's face. She felt the product was not very suitable for her skin and decided to apply it while looking at herself in the mirror. The woman quickly approached the mirror. Donna looked into the magic glass and applied the powder to her face. Everything was fine for a while, but then strange things started to happen. Donna looked at everything with wide eyes. The powder box fell from the woman's hands onto the carpet. The scream. Donna's heart-wrenching scream could be heard throughout the mansion. That scream was also heard in the living room. Rosie was the first to run to her room and saw an unusual sight there. Donna sat in the middle of the room on her knees and sobbed loudly. Rosie looked at Donna fearfully and asked what had happened to her face. Donna turned around and everyone saw that her cheeks were covered with sores and bumps. The Countess and the butler were present when the doctor examined Donna Bromental. He determined that the irritation on the woman's skin was caused by poison. The doctor said the blisters would disappear in a few days, but the scars would probably be permanent. Donna grabbed the doctor by the shirt and shouted what he was saying. Nonsense. What kind of doctor was he if he couldn't stand that nonsense? Or Rosie had forced him to say it. Count Eric ran to the room, found a sweet image of Donna, trying to find a way to heal her through the doctor. The woman left the poor doctor and broke down crying. Donna ran to the Count and asked him what she should do. Now the Duke had no idea what was going on, but the doctor quickly realized what was happening. Rosie explained that Donna had applied to her face the powder that the Count had given to his wife and as a result had suffered burns. The Count was incredibly surprised. He never gave cosmetics. Eric realized that probably his father had come, and that this incident had been solely his doing. Bromental, he ordered all the Countess's cosmetics to be brought. If the cause is hidden in the cosmetics, then the poisonous product should be in this room. Donna had to find it. The woman examined everything and said there was no poisonous substance there. She clearly remembered that the powder was contained in a jar with a gemstone in the middle. It was strange that it was precisely that box that disappeared. As if it had evaporated, Donna said that the box with the Count's note had disappeared. Donna blamed Rosie for ordering the product to be discarded. The woman shouted furiously that Rosie had lured her into a trap and destroyed the evidence. The butler was sure that the Countess was not capable of such a thing. He interrogated all the servants to start. There was no such box in the Countess's room after all. Who would believe that any maid would dare to take the Countess's cosmetics and use them for her own needs? Donna's screams disturbed the Count so much that he demanded the abuse stop and promised to fix everything. Rosie asked if the Count could leave, but Eric replied that he didn't have time and advised his wife to go to bed. Donna sobbed inconsolably, asking why she was being punished like this and what she had done wrong. Just for using a little cream, the butler responded to the girl's howls that she had simply forgotten her place. The lady tolerates Donna's mischief in communication with the master but still needs to remember who she is and why she is in the mansion. Donna was outraged by the butler's words but remained silent. Firmly convinced that it was Rosie who was sitting where she shouldn't be, Donna was sure she could take everything from Rosie at any moment but showed mercy. The woman wanted to declare that she was the Count's beloved, but the words got stuck in her throat and she did not say the full sentence. The world swayed around the troublemaker. The colors faded. The last thing she saw was the blurry silhouette of the butler and someone's voice demanding she wake up. Cedric's office was decorated in a minimalist medieval style. The faithful servant was always by the hideout side. Eric's father read a letter from his son in which he promised to deal with Rosie himself. The son wrote that the gift had been received, but that his father should not interfere in the course of events. Eric wrote that he wanted to divorce his wife, and that his father should not touch her until the divorce. Cedric called his son a scoundrel, but in reality, he was willing to support him in everything. Cedric asked why his servant was returning to the mansion. The boy replied that he wanted to warn Eric and take the cream, but it disappeared without a trace. Cedric ordered the note to be delivered to Saren. The guy now had to find out who had the bottle. Saren read the note and realized he was in a strange position. He had the bottle and the butler had given it to the man. Gray asked Saren to take care of the lady and prevent her from being hurt or dying. The boy understood that he had a terrible poison in his hands. The butler said it had been 30 years since he had faithfully served Lord Cedric. There was once a wise and kind man who cared for his family. It was worth following such a master. Through fire and water now, Cedric had resorted to dirty methods to save his reputation, and furthermore the butler could not allow the Countess to continue suffering because of Eric. Gray was furious because behind Rosie's back Eric was having affairs with different women of all classes. The butler asked Saren if he was loyal to the Countess, and upon receiving an affirmative answer, he handed over the poison box. Now Saren was the owner of the unfortunate box, and the fate of the people and the future of the empire depended on him. At the same time, in the guest room, the doctor told Donna and Eric that the woman was fine. The pregnancy and stress were draining a lot of energy. She just needed to rest. Donna clasped her hands joyfully and asked if the Count had heard that they were going to have a baby. Donna said she was incredibly happy to be pregnant with his child. The woman did not understand her condition. Now she cried for Rosie, and now she was happy for the heir. For some reason the Count looked at his recent passion with indifference. Donna told Eric that the fruit of their love lived inside her, and it felt very strange. The Count could not believe he could finally have an heir. The woman also tried to slander the butler, saying that he had yelled at her and she had run and fallen. The main thing was that she did not harm the baby. Eric was angry with the old butler. How dare he touch Donna? The Count initially decided to scold Donna, but stopped in time. Now was a very opportune moment to act. Eric decided to take advantage of this moment and get rid of his father's spy in the person of the old man. Eric gently tucked Donna into bed, promised to talk to Gwen, and wished her a speedy recovery. Donna threw herself around the Count's neck, exclaiming that only he could protect her. The butler appeared in Count Eric's office. Eric got straight to the point, said he knew that Gwen was trying to mock Donna. The butler tried to explain his actions. The Count interrupted him abruptly and continued, saying that because of the butler's actions, Donna lost consciousness and could have lost the baby. Gwen shifted from foot to foot, had a premonition of what awaited her. The Count declared that he could not ignore the insult to the mother of his child and therefore fired Gwen.